Hello. Well,
Mario.
welcome, Jacob.
Hi. Hi.
I just quit the school meeting. I'm going to text Ernie that we're waiting for him.
Shalom Aleichem.
Oh, Ernie.
Well,
So first of all, I definitely want to welcome a good friend, Yaakov Yellen. He's, for
Hi
those
there.
who don't know, Yaakov and his wife went to Spain on a Torah in Motion tour with Susie and I, and we became very good friends. And he heard about our Tzurba Shir and has joined it. It's wonderful to see you. By the way, Yaakov, if I recall, studied with Rav Moshe Feinstein. I believe got smicha from Rav Moshe Feinstein from Yeshivas Tiferes Yerushalayim. And I told him that a lot of our Tzurba Shiurim involve Shuvas from Igros Moshe. So hopefully we will get a special insight that he might have remembered, Rav Moshe might have said something about a certain topic. So Yaakov, welcome. It's really wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Renee. I really appreciate it. Your memory is very good and accurate. It's a pleasure, and hopefully, I will remember some things that Ramosha said. Was many years ago, but he certainly made quite an impression on me, and I will be happy to share. But I appreciate the very nice welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaakov. Okay, so we are doing the COVID volume. We left off on page 60, where we talked about there seemed to be a connection. We were trying to deal with the issue, can you have a minyan where, for example, some people are inside a house, some people are outside a house, but they can see each other. So there was a connection made. Well, in Zimun, when you have, let's say, 5 people sitting in one room and 5 people are in another room, but they can see each other, so they can combine for Zimun. And they wanted to make the analogy over to tefillah. But it's not so simple. As we see, the Mishnah Berurah notes that this approach of combining people in different rooms or places as part of the 10, simply because they can see each other, is not accepted as widely as being applicable within halachas of tefillah as it is within halachas of zimun. In fact, I'm going to read the footnote. Not all opinions allow for combining even within halachas zimun. It means the fact that the one opinion said you can do it, not everybody agrees with that. Citing the Rashbash, who limits the halacha there as well. That's what the Bir halacha of the Mishnah Berurah brings in the Bir halacha, that not everybody agrees to the opinion, even with Zimun, that you can combine people just by seeing them. But it seems that the lenient opinion is accepted as the halacha regarding Zimun, that if they can see each other, it's accepted. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. This is Orach Chaim Nun Hey. Even though there's a barrier, Kivin Demaralam Panav, there's some kind of, he can see his face. Because this is talking about a person was outside of a shul in the back, and there was a window, and they could see his face through the window. So there's a separation, but they can see his face. So the Mishnah Berurah says there were people who say it's similar in Zimun. The miktsas and roin elu eselu, the mitzarfin, that if a part of the one group sees the part of the other group, they can be mitzarf to 10. Let's say you're in a shul where there's not room by the men's section, and there are men standing in the Ezras Noshim, and there's a mechitza mafsekes. and there's a wall, but yesh chalon. There's a window, marlen panov, and therefore they can see their face. Therefore, misham yitzrafim lasora. So based on the zimun issue, where if you see each other, they can be mitzraf, there's an opinion that says they could be mitzraf by minyan as well. Kol shekain, certainly, he says, dim yesh bilado asara. Let's say it certainly will work if there's already a minyan there without him. It's considered as if he's participating in tefillah b'tzibur. Aval pichein, says the Mishnah, Yoter tov im benekel hu lo leired lebeis hakneses. He's talking about a mechitza that was upstairs. He says if it's easy for him to go downstairs, it's better that he should sheyered. He says the yeshma achronim shecholkin al ikar adim regarding by zimun. The sovrim dinyanenu eno dome klal zimun. And not only that, even if it works by zimun, it's not that clear to all the achronim that you can make this zushtel, this comparison between the fact that people see each other as zimun and a mitzaref, and being mitzaref them by minyan. The same issue arises with regard to a number of other similar cases in the same simon. For example, Shulchan Aruch discusses a case where part of the minyan is outside the shul, while the rest is inside. In this case, he rules that the two groups do not combine together. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Orchaim Nunhei, im ktsas asor beves hakneses, uktsasam bazora eina mitzarfin. Let's say there's people in the shul, people in the courtyard of the shul, that they can't be mitzaref. Here too, the Mishnah Berurah notes that some allow this if they can see each other, but he appears to conclude that it's best to be machmir. So the Mishnah Berurah's comment there in Orchaim Nunei, the katsosam bazor, that if a small amount of them are in the courtyard, hu adin afilum tespa beis hakneses for yachid bazera, and it doesn't make a difference in 9 and 1. Because of a prima godim, dahi to see if you'd zayin, v'yud test myri. These are the various simonim that the prima godim is talking about. B'she'en and roin zed zeh, that this is clearly that they can't see each other. But roin zed zeh, afilu b'shnei batim mamish mitztarfin, dumi dezimun. That let's say they were in two different houses, but they can see each other. He says they do mitztarf, like zimun. But lakaman b'simin kuf tzadik hey, v'yesh machmirin afilu b'roin of v'mokam atchak efshar sheyesh lahakel. So the Mishnah Berurah is telling us that b'shas atchak you can be lenient, but meikar adin, some are stringent even when they can see each other. So one of the people who was lenient, the Tzurba brings, was the Chidah in the Machzik Bracha, which is cited in the Shari Tshuva and Orchaim in the same in Nun Zayin, who encountered a situation somewhat similar to that, is similar to what we find ourselves in COVID. The Chidah was quarantined in a Lazaret. So the countries, the Chidah is 200-300 years ago, when they used to travel between country and country, and they were afraid that you were bringing in an infectious disease, they would quarantine you in a house on the border for a period of time before they let you in. Similar to, when the early immigrants came to Ellis Island in 1920, and in that period of time, or before, already the late 1880s up until 1920 when they closed it, that if there was any hint of TB, if you had a cough, so they interred you there in Ellis Island for months before they would let you into the country. So this was a story with the Chidah, who was quarantined before entering Livorno, Italy, as this was the common practice at the time for travelers arising from certain parts of the world where infectious disease were common. He discusses a case where two groups of Jews were being held in two separate buildings with a guard in the middle, but were not allowed to walk outside and mingle together. He rules that if the two groups can see each other, while one is inside one building, the other is outside, they can combine together to form a minyan. He explains that given the situation, where otherwise they would not be able to organize a minyan for 40 days consecutively, there is room to follow the lenient opinions. Means if they haven't been in a minyan for 40 days, or if it's going to lead to that, then there's a reason to be makel. Says the Chidah, Belatzareto, שנוהגים בערים האלה יש בייס כיתות שם שאינם יכולים להיגע זה בזה. You have two groups, two different houses, they can't touch each other. ויש שישה בבית אחד ובבית אחר, 6 in one house, 4 in another. שמעתי ברב אחד, I heard from a certain רב, שנסתפק, הם בידינו שם, אם הדלת יכולנו להיות לפני הפסח, פסח הבייס, והצטרפו לעשרה. Can you bring 4 close to the opening of the house that has 6? והצטרפו לעשרה כיוון שרואים זה את זה. Because of this kula of re'iyah. Oh, einam mitztarfena. Maybe even if they can see each other, and you bring them to the door there, they will not be mitztaref. The liah hedyot nira says, me, the simple one, sees the mitztarfin. I see that they should be mitztaref. Dari elu einam yicholim lavo b'bayis. They're not allowed to walk in the house. That's the law prevents them. The guard that's in between the two buildings is with the group that's outside. The people in the house can't go to the outside. It's very narrow. There's a lot of people out there. So here it's a shasat chak. They cannot get together in the normal way. Mitama Melech. It's a government law. The Shoyam Dinos and the Sorayam Dinos and the officers, the police. The 4 have come to the door and showed their face. Says the Chidav Kamar of their Chalon Mitztarif. It's as if they came to a window. And it's similar. The Koshakenu Kiloev Shabashum Ponim Lios Lachad V'Lakarv Zelzeh. They can't go in the same room. They can't get close to each other. The Kivin says the Chidah. The Ikekama Poiskim Nira Lismoch Alehem. V'lo Yispatlu Mem Yom Lispal B'Tziv V'lo Yishmu Kadishu Kedusha. So, how do we apply the sources we quoted to our situation in COVID? It would seem that according to what we have seen in cases where the participants of the minyan are standing in their yards, driveways, or on their porches with separations such as fences in between, it's a machlokes, whether they combine together to form the minyan if they can see each other. But there may be room to be lenient according to the Mishnah Berurah when necessary. And according to the Chidah, there may be even more reason to be lenient in allowing such minyan in our case of COVID, as long as safe by healthcare guidelines, where a large portion of shuls around the world were closed at a certain point, and many minyanim would not have taken place otherwise for longer than 40 days. Now, another consideration that must be addressed is that within the continuation of the above mentioned halach and hilchos zimun, that serves as part of the source for why allowing people can see each other to combine together by minyan, the Shulchan Aruch records the opinion of Rabbeinu Yonah that one cannot combine groups together who are separated by Rishus Harabim. So let's say you have groups of Jews with houses that are on either side of the Rishus Harabim. And you have 5 Jews here, and then there's the Rishus Harabim, and 5 Jews on the other side. So the Shulchan Aruch says, Yesh Misha Oimer, Shemashus Harabim Afsekes, Ben Shnei Abatim, Einem Starfim B'Shul Minyan. Then even if they can see each other, the Rishus Harabim serves as a natural barrier. The Mishnah Berurah adds, based on the Taz over there, that the term Rishus Harabim is not limited to a public thoroughfare. You know, like Rav Moshe said, there's got to be 600,000. If you have the Fifth Avenue that has 600,000 people traveling on it every day, you cannot be ma'ariv it because it's considered Rishus Harabim. But Mishnah Berurah is saying that this quote-unquote Rishus Harabim is not talking about a typical Rishus Harabim. Rather, any thoroughfare, even private, creates a separation that would prevent the individuals on either side from combining to form a zimun as well. Rishus Harabim says, right, because Kuf Tzadik Hey is dealing with the halachas of benching. So this opinion that with zimun you could be mitzvah if you can see them does not work across a street. Says the Mishnah, because of Ataz lav dafka Rishus Harabim mamish shu rachav tez zayin amos. There the Taz was using a different criteria, not 600,000 travelers, but if you have a road that's 16 amas wide, so an amma is 2 feet, so you're talking about a 32-foot wide street. So we're not just talking about that. Even a small path. And that means if the path is washed away easily by rain, then Eina Chanami, there could be Hitztarfus. But if the path is somewhat concretized and remains during the winter, it would serve as a hefsek between the two groups. So if you accept the opinion of the Taz Mishnah Berurah, then we might assume that a street or even a sidewalk constitutes a separation for these purposes. Therefore,
So
one
that-
could, yeah,
That would negate the minyan that people were having on the terraces on Shabbos or during the weekdays in Eretz Yisrael. There was common across major streets.
yeah. Therefore, one could not have half of the minions standing on their porches or on the sidewalks on one side of the street and the other half on the other side of the street. And this approach seems to be the approach of the Minchas Yitzchak, Dayan Weiss, who was the Av Beis Din of the Eda Charedis in Yerushalayim, until Rav Moshe Sternbuch took over about 10 years ago after the Minchas Yitzchak, or 15 years ago after the Minchas Yitzchak passed away, concerning forming a minyan in a park or similar area, where he says that the participants should be careful not to stand on two sides of a path. Think about people who go to Disneyland and they make a minyan. So based on this halacha, we've got to be careful. Where do we assemble the minyan? We have to make sure that we're not, if we're on Main Street in Disneyland, you got to be careful where you're setting up the minyan, because there might be a hafsaka. Says the Minchas Yitzchak, "Ba'nosham ha'mispalim b'kayitz mincha u'mayriv b'sodeh." Right? In the summertime, people are on a park and they'll gather to make a minyan. So it was asked, how far can you be away from the group in order to be mitzarf these people to a minyan? So you got to be careful. The people where they go for nice air, there are walking paths. And listen, people who are making a minyan don't want to block a walking path. So mischalkim amispalalim. So the minyan breaks up. 5 people will gather on this side of the path, 5 on the other. Vashvil beineim. The azyesh lomer de'enam mitzarfim. L'fi madisnil in zimun, because of what they learned. Since the whole itzarfus for minyan was learned from zimun, and since we brought the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah that said by zimun, you cannot be mitzarf if there's a street dividing them, so it's not going to work by tefillah, certainly. So what's the opinion of the contemporary poskim in the era of COVID-19? That means we've quoted the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah, the Chidah. These are the sources. So what do the current poskim, based on those sources, what have they said? So there have been a variety of opinions suggested concerning this issue from a strictly halachic perspective. Rav Asher Weiss, right, the Minchas Usher, addresses this question of volume, who he has a Minchas Usher volume that's related just to coronavirus. He rules there that such minyanim are important to arrange, as long as it's sanctioned by the health guidelines. And he permits forming a minyan from a number of nearby porches separated by a stairwell, small walkway, or private playground, but not across two sides of the street. Says the Minchas Usher, B'she'elat rabim ekev itzpashtus machlas corona, because of questions that have come during this epidemic, v'achshash hagadol mihidbatkut, we're concerned about contagion and infectious disease betfilas atzibur b'bate knesios. Him shchenim. You have a street in Yerushalayim or anywhere, and you have neighbors. Yicholim lispala b'marpesos v'chatzeros bateyim. Can they stand on their porch or in a courtyard? Well, it starts with minyan kashem roim zed zeh kol echad b'miris pesach v'chatzer beiton. So you can see your neighbor from your porch or from your chutzner in front of your house. Can you make a minyan in that way? So he brings the Or Chaim, Nunei, Misha Omer Achrei Beis HaKnesses, which we said if someone's behind a shul, it can be seen through a mirror, through a window. We said there's itztarfus. Halacha zu nifsek b'shulchan aruch, v'loshan bru muchletes, v'lad tzara sofek. Chasher matzinu halacha mufareshes b'shulchan aruch, v'harama, right? Rav Moshe Yisrael lo chalak alav, and ataz b'magen Avraham toimche biyado. So hachoylek aleim kachoylek ala shchina. Whoever argues with that cohort is like arguing with Hashem. And you don't have to listen to such a posei. Says the Prichodesh, who was a Perish on the tour, a Prima Godim, by Mishnah Brura. The Prima Godim agrees, Mishnah Brura agrees. Softover Kivin Shebashas Atchat, Askinon Yesh Lahoris Avlachat Chilosh, Efsar Tzarif Minyan, Asar Der Chatzeros, Merpesos Kasher Royim, Vishomim Elisei. So Mincha Susha is very clear that you can do such a minyan if they can see each other. I was asked from a certain Rav, if you have a merpeset from two sides of an opening to an apartment, the cheder madregos beneim, and you have steps between them, can you join them? We can evaluate the because of a machaber in Kuf Tzadikei by Zimun. The Yesh Oimim Dim Derech Harabim Avsekes Ben Shnei Abatim and it's Starfin. So he's quoting the halacha we learned tonight that if there's a derech between, there's no itztarfus. The Yesh La'ayin Benidun Didon im Ma'aver Madregod. If these steps havi kederech harabim, the Taz cause of the lav dafka derech harabim. The Taz said that it's not necessarily limited to a public thoroughfare, but any kind of derech. And therefore, he's worried that maybe steps or going upstairs might be a separation. Omnam, says the Minchas Osher, Kol Zer Legabi Din Zimun B'Chas HaMoza. That siman was written by Zimun. Ach legabe halachas tefillah lo matzinu b'chol divrei haposkim b'halachas zushu b'siman nun hey, the kol sheroin zed zeh mitztarfin. Now, that which we saw in the siman and Shulchan Aruch that we quoted in Nun Hey, where if somebody's on the back of a shul and can be seen inside the shul through his face, where we said there isn't starfus. So this Minchas Osher is pointing out, we never saw shiachloku im yesh rishus harabi b'nei alo. Nobody ever brought this issue was, can he be seen from across a rishus? Was if there's a rishus of some kind separating between the person who's looking into the shul behind the back or not. The Yeteremizu, and moreover, Mashma of Devrei Maslik Brocha, that's the Chidah that we learned tonight. The Afim Yesh Rishus Harab B'nei Mitztarfin. Right? The Chidah didn't have a problem with a derech in between. So he says, Ach mikol mokum l'maisa, lo melana libi la'akel sheyitztarfu, Afim Yesh B'nei Rishus Harab. So the Minchas Osher says, I'm going along with, let's say if there's a steps dividing, if there's madrigot, but he's not willing to go far to say that if you're standing on two sides of a street, that you could be mitzvah. The imi zimun lamadnu, because that is learned from zimun. When there is a concept, if you have a kavachomer, so and you're learning from one din to another, well, you can't be more stringent from what you're learning from. So, or be more makel. You got to learn from exactly what you're learning from. So if we're learning from Zimun and there's a problem with a rishus between the people who are mitzdarf, you'd certainly have to say you couldn't be more lenient by tefillah. If there's just a private thoroughfare where it's just a path for one person, he says yesh lahakel. Because he said the fact that Taz said that even a small street, not a Rishus Harabim, is mafsik, that the whole thing was a chiddush by Zimun. He says if there's just a simple pathway that's opening up into the building, or there's steps, or a migrash, like a courtyard, mesachakim, a playground, hamashamish is dire opinion that is being used, and that's what's separating the people who are trying to daven. Yesh lahakel tzvei shvarei and echoitzitz. There he's lenient. And Rav Weiss rules like the lenient opinions, except when a street or public thoroughfare separates between the participants. Other poskim, such as Rav Moshe Steinbuch, Rav Moshe Sternbuch, the Chuvas van Hagois, and Moadim Uzmanim, who's the current Av Bezdin of the Eidach Haredis, and Rashmul Eliyahu, also have taken the position that these minyanim are permitted in theory in our situation. Though Rav Sternbuch suggests that the Chazan stipulate that when he says the Chazoras Hashatz, it's a voluntary tefillah if the halacha is that it doesn't constitute a minyan. The problem is, if the Shatz is not going to say a Chazoras Hashatz, and it's not really counted as a minyan, he's concerned about the name of Hashem, and so he says it's just going to be a voluntary tefillah. If the halacha is that it's really not. So he makes like a t'nai. In addition, he does not permit, even if a small walkway or private thoroughfare separates between the participants, unless they are standing on a porch higher than 10 tfachim. I'm reading the footnote. Many of these rulings also they address the question of how many of the participants must see others in order for the minyan to be valid. And most agree that the chazan must be able to see all of the participants, though the rest of them do not have to see each other. They also address if and how birchas kohanim should be performed as well, how to conduct a safer halachically accepted kriyas HaTorah. We will discuss that later on in this volume. So what does Rav Moshe Sternbuch say? B'nei Beis Yisrael, b'rov makomos v'shvosei mispalim ba'es hazos b'toch beisam b'yechidus. Today, lot says b'chshas sakana. He says today, during Corona, most people are davening at home, b'yechidus, to avoid danger. He says the Kadosh Baruch Hu is giving reward to people who elect not to daven b'tzibur as if they daven b'tzibur. For all the reasons we have learned already. Sakana is more chomer than isura. So Rav Moshe Sternbuch doesn't have any problem with somebody davening b'yechidus. However, b'mkomos b'hem yesh masar shchenim, he says there are places where there's neighbors, haroin elu selu, derech hachalon, through a window or mirpesas, based on their porch, l'kulam shoyim es hashatz, oim b'soch beison, they can all hear the chazan who's in his home, yuchlu litztarf l'minyan deitziruf deroyin elu selu. He says they can be mitztarif through the kula of royin, like he brings the Mishnah Berurah Nun Hey, right? He says, even though Mishnah says it's better to be machmir, but nidun didan, Rav Sternbuch is saying, because of Corona, our situation, so he says there's no problem to be soymech on davening with a minyan as long as you can see people. The Rashba mentioned this as a possibility. And then there are Rishonim who argue with the Rashba. And Ken Roy Shashatz Yosef Tnai Shemei Mitztarfin Tet Tfilos Nedava. Rather than his tefillah being a chiyuv, should be a voluntary, a donative tefillah. He should make it nice. He should say, well, this tefillah should be a nedava in case the rule is that we don't have a minyan. So he's more stringent than Rav Weiss, as you can see. Even if it's just a single pathway between houses. He says if they're above 10 tfachim and they can see each other, then you can rely on it that the path is not a half-sick, but otherwise you can't rely on it. Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, who lives in Alon Shvut, he's a major posek in the Mizrahi world today. I've had the opportunity to meet him on many occasions. He's a wonderful person. He writes in the HaMizrahi many times, and if you get the HaMizrahi magazine. He is the Rav currently of Machon Lev, the college. It's actually a high school. It's like a science high school and college in Yerushalayim. Our good friend, Professor Chaim Sukenik, is the dean there, and Rav Yosef Rimon is now the Mordeh Asra there, and learns there. He's so the students there have access to him. So notes within his, yes. So Rav Rimon notes within his detailed instructions on this question that in an outdoor minyan, where everyone stands on the sidewalk or street in front of their house at a significant distance from each other, the issue of the separation of a public thoroughfare is less problematic, since the minyan itself is being held on the public premises. So therefore, they're all in the same basic reshus. Tfilah b'madrechot, he says, davening in the sidewalks, im yesh asor sheroim zeh et zeh, ol v'chod asor sheroim es hashatz, or at least 10 people that see the shliach tzibur, nitin lispalal kol kerogel, no problem. Kol chazar hashatz or kriyas haTorah b'chas kohanim, you can do everything. You can have chazar hashatz, you can do kriyas haTorah, you can do duchening. Gam im yeshno kvish ha'oiver ben shtei hakvutzos, even if there's a street that passes between the group, they're all in the same reshus, says Rav Rimon. Even shekulam bos reshus harabim. It's not like you're on your house, which is reshus hayachid, that the Taz was referring to over there by Zimun, where they said the reshus harabim is being mafsik. They're in the reshus harabim. As the public sidewalk is a reshus harabim. V'lachein ein kan hefsek klal. B'prat she'ein tnuas mechonit v'nitin lamod gam al hakvish. So it's going to be relevant on Shabbos where there's no traffic. So therefore you can mamish stand in the street. Certainly there would be no hefsek by that street because you're all in the street. So for example, my son who lives in Yerushalayim, so the laning of the Megillah occurred on a street. They all people, he lives on Rehov Tveria in Shari Chesed. So everyone stood in front of their house. I guess they set up a balkora in the street, and they all stood in front of their house, and there was a laning for the street. Okay, so we've seen Rav Weiss, Rav Sternbuch, Rav Rimon, they're lenient. However, some poskim, such as Rav Hershel Schachter and Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the current Sephardic chief rabbi, have been opposed to such minyanim on strictly halachic grounds, based on the opinions who are more stringent than the Achronim, right? Those that argued with the Rashba. The Rashba is one who mentioned the tzushtal between Zimun and Minyan. But many of the Achronim argued with the Rashba. Rav Shechter also adds that even an outdoor minyan should be discouraged due to the danger involved. Rav Shechter has been very firm about, following the guidelines of the government regarding the health issues. So he was concerned as well, how safe would a minyan be even when you're doing it in this way? So let's see what Rav Shechter says here. Everybody's davening in front of their house, on the porch. They're all close to each other, that neighbors can see each other. So Yeshiratzu Lomar, there are those who wanted to say, right, based on the Mishnah Berurah Nun Hey, that the Malkam Atchak you can be Mekel. Right, that's the Chidah that we learned. One of the reasons the Chidah gave, because we don't want to go by 40 days without Kaddish Kedusha. He says it's all standing on the pin of the halacha in the Mishnah Brachos le'inyan zimun, and the Tshuvas HaRashba nistapik b'zeh imadin shel miktzos roim elu eselu shaykh af ledvarim shebekdusha. So the Rashba raised it as a possibility based on zimun, where it's clear that there's a din of haroya. The Rashba entertained the possibility maybe it'll work for a davar shebekdusha that requires a minyan. But But if you read the sugi there in the Gemara, he says it's clear from the sugi in the Gemara that in order to say Dvorim Shebekdusha, Kriyas HaTorah, Duchening, Shatz, Kaddish, Kedusha, all 10 have to be in one room. The Akula le'inyin Zimun ba'asaru b'mnei Zimun b'shem ein lo din davar shebekdusha. And Zimun, when you say Baruch Elokeinu, is not a davar shebekdusha. It's not considered davar shebekdusha. That's why there's a leniency by Aroyim. Umin anachon limnoya, says Rav Shechter, you should prevent b'lasos minyonim b'shetach patuach shlifnei abatim. You should not do minyonim in the courtyard in front of your house, or macharem, or the back of your house. You're putting yourself in a situation of a possible sakana in order to daven with a minyan. So he says no. Says Rav Yosef, Hey Yosef Yamim Elu, Anu Nishal Ibnei Ravnei Kehilos Me'aretz Mechutz La'aretz Shelos Rabos. I'm being asked from Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, Binyan Tefillah B'Tzibur. Often I'd start with Lamina Muteres Vasura. How can you be mitzvah to a minyan in a permissible manner? So he says, Bereshis Dvareinu Ani Chozer Mavir shall be das Torah Chavim Lishama Bechlet Lanchiot Misran Abriyut. So first he says, you must listen to the health authorities. If the health authorities say no minyan, there's no minyan. No itztarfus, no royin. Follow what they say. Now, b'davar tzirf leminyan, b'rishonot chalukot. You're in different locations, like kigon b'kamamir pasot. People are in different porches, all in front of their courtyards in their houses. Chatzeres abatim echadoyme. B'ofen shebachol rishus yesh pachos minyan. In each individual place, there's less than minyan, but uvitziruf kulam yesh minyan sal shabbat. When you add them all up, they're 10. L'maisei lismoch al zeklal linyan tzirf leminyan. Says don't rely on it. Ve'lasas chazor l'otzi slave for Torah. You should not do shliach tzibur should not do chazor sashatz or take out sefer Torah. Levach berachos kohanim. Ki pashut yesh kan chashash shel kama brachos levat tola. Could be there is no minyan, and therefore all these brachos that you're going to make is levat tola. V'kach daitam shel roiv kechol haposkim asfardim v'gam ashkenazim. He says that's the majority of the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic poskim. So right now we have Rav Weiss, Rav Sternbuch, who normally is a great machmir, but he seemed to be lenient here, and Rav Rimon, and you have Rav Shechter and Rav Yosef who seem to not allow it. Then there's a third group of poskim, including Rav Shlomo Miller of Toronto, a major posek, who I've had some dealings with regarding Suadaka and shilas that of certain medical shilas. He's a major posek in North America today. And Rav Azariah Ariel of Yerushalayim takes the middle position that these types of minyanim are permitted, but brachos may not be recited, such as Chazar Sashatz, Kriyas HaTorah, due to questions of suffix brachos. They also stress the importance of following the health guidelines. And if you can't follow the health guidelines, cancel the minyan. Says the Rav Shlomo Miller, you have to follow the laws. Ufkudat harofim, what the doctors order. To 6 feet distancing and masks and whatever else they say. You shouldn't gather in a group to make a minyan. There's too much danger. People are not going to distance properly. So he knows that by people gathering and other people looking in, not necessarily Jewish people, it's creating a chilul Hashem because the government says to stay apart and we're gathering. As long you can make a minyan if you're out on your porch, as long as you follow the guidelines. Each person should stand on his own balcony. You don't gather with other people. You shouldn't allow outside people come into your place. And if people are going to violate the health guidelines by trying to get around all this, it's better to abolish the minyanim. Gamdati lachmer kedas av bezdin de bnei brak harashvach Rosenblatt shein lasos shum chazos hashatz or kriyas Torah or shar bracha tzricha minyan. He says if you make these minyanim using the kula of this haroya, don't make brachas like chazos hashatz, kriyas Torah, or anything that would need a minyan. Kiven sheish plukta im it start from idei ribilavat. It's clear tonight we've learned that there's a machlokes whether you can use re'iyah to be mitzdarif. And therefore, if you're going to make these brachas and really make her adin, the minyan doesn't work, you're going to make bracha levatala. Rakit starfulin in kaddish or kedusha, but kaddish and kedusha he allows. It's not a bracha. Lachinochan she starfu minyanei mirpesas rak lemincha l'spal mincha ktsara. You should do a hecha kedusha by mincha. They learn a rak kaddish or kedusha b'minyan, right? Just say kaddish for kedusha, and you do a hecha kedusha, so you don't have to have a full chazor hashatz. And the minyan should only organize for mincha, because mincha works well. Myra, there's no kedusha, so at least by mincha you get a kedusha. And you see, we learned tonight that there's some kind of inyan not going 40 days without kedusha and kaddish. So that's what Rav Miller said.
Hey, Ernie, where does that Indian come from? Where's the origin of that 40 days?
Yeah, I didn't see. Yeah, it must be Kabbalistic, because Rav Schechter brought. Oh no, the Chidah brought this issue of the kula, because you don't want to go
40 days.
You don't want to go 40 days. They didn't bring a source for it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's some kind of mystical thing.
Also had been the actual fact that they have to be apart for 40 days. And that's what he's talking about, that it's a 40-day period and it's a very long period of time.
You mean the quarantine was 40 days?
Correct.
That was
Correct.
what he was dealing with.
Right.
So it may not necessarily, that was just what he was dealing with.
Correct.
But you see, Rav Schechter grabbed onto the words of the Chidah. Sham shalibad or boim yom eloim kaddish kedusha. Yeah, it could be that's what was going on in Livorno then.
Well, I don't know if they mentioned it earlier, but the Quarantov, it's 40. The term quarantine comes from the word Quarantov, which is 40.
Wow,
that's
fantastic.
That's where it comes from. Because they were quarantined for 40. They were in seclusion for 40 days, and the term quarantine came from Quarantov.
Oh, that's great. So that's
40.
That's fantastic.
Harold, pronounce it right.
40.
Wow, Harold.
Oh, so that was it. In Italy, where the Chidah was quarantined, it was a standard 4 days, and 40 is 40. That's fantastic. Thank you, Harold.
Good,
You're
Harold.
welcome.
Thank you, Yaakov. Very good. So, Rav Ariel says, "B'shasat chaka gdoila, shalom mitzuyim bo efshel l'tzaref minyan kazeh." We might be able to mitzaref minyan, but nai sha'ashachin sharoes kulam. There might be one neighbor who can see everybody. Hu yeshlich hatzibur uv'tnai shekulam shoyim, as long as they can hear him. Kivan sheish balacha zu safek. But since this issue, can you be mitzaref this minyan through sight only, is a safek. Odiv shechazor hashatz b'shachris. You should do a hecha kedusha. So there'll be less issue of bracha levatala. Tnai chiyuni lekiyumo shel aminu shekol hashutafim lo memalim achar hoiraos habtichut b'lishum igulei pinos. He says you gotta follow the safety instructions, no cutting any corners, because that's the key thing. And if you can't do it with those things, then don't make the minyan. Trumpist, mabinyan she'enegar bedira. It means you see a visitor there. Or im yesh chashash zeh alul likros, Yesh levatos haminyan la'alter. Right? You shouldn't make the minyan if you should disband the minyan if strangers, visitors are coming in there, and it's going to be a problem. So far we have three approaches. Rav Weiss, who said you could rely on to make a regular minyan, and then we had Rav Schechter that said you cannot do any of it. You should not make a minyan because the sakana is too great. Then Rav Miller and Rav Ariel say take a middle approach. You could do a minyan with this approach by looking, but reduce the brachas. Don't duchen, do a heche kedusha. Just try to do kaddish kedusha. Now there's a fourth approach that no outdoor porch minyanim should be formed due to the practicalities of forming them in a manner that is deemed safe and meet the approval of local health authorities. If they are arranged properly in one location, others elsewhere may stand too close together. It means one people may know what they're doing, but the others won't. Or allow additional visitors to join, or not carefully follow the guidelines another way, thus potentially endangering the public. Due to this overall concern, the poskim who support this approach feel strongly that all such minyanim should not be allowed in any form until conditions have improved, even if the federal law and health guidelines do allow for them. This has been termed a low plug for pikuach nefesh, an across-the-board ban, even when permissible, in order to safeguard lives. And this approach has been encouraged by poskim such as Rav Mordechai Willig of Yeshiva University and Rav Yitzchak Berkowitz. He's at Esha Torah and was accepted as the proper one for a significant period of time during the current crisis in many places across the world where minyanim were completely closed. And they didn't even want you to do outside minyanim. In concluding this section, we must stress that this has been a brief review of the issues involved in outdoor and porch minyanim from a mostly halachic standpoint. Concerning the practical situation and guidelines, since every location is different and the situation and guidelines change frequently, one must, of course, follow the most up-to-date guidance of local rabbinic authorities at all times. Okay, let's continue. Page 70, responding to a minyan seen or heard online. Another question that's become quite common recently is whether it is permitted to respond to a minyan that one listens to on the phone or views over a live video feed like Zoom or another online platform. Now, many of the people in this shiur on this Zoom today know that we've been learning some of the sources to this issue in our shiur with Tzvika Reisman. So we'll see whether some of the same things come up. I'm sure they will. May one respond to Kaddish, Kedusha, or Bracha when heard in such a fashion over Zoom. By the way, Rav Daniel Feldman, who is a good friend of ours, you can see his article. Rav Daniel Feldman is one of the most outstanding Talmidei Chachamim at Yeshiva University today. He's a major author. He's visited us at Kilat Yavna and spoken to us before. He's spoken at the National Mizrahi Convention. He's very close to Rav Schechter. And so I would encourage that you look that website up. The essence of the question is whether one may respond to a bracha or other davar shebekdusha that one cannot hear directly from the other person, but one knows it's being recited at that moment. There's a passage in the Gemara in Sukkah concerning the great shul in Alexandria, Egypt, that indeed it would be permitted to respond in such cases. This is the famous Gemara in Masechta Sukkah Nun Aleph. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishalor Ra Yofloston Shel Alexandra, the great synagogue in Alexandria, Shel Mitzrayim Lo Ra B'Chvodin Shel Yisrael, never saw glory in Israel. Amru Kamin Basiliki Gdola Haisos Stav Lifni Mistav. There was a basilica, like a dome, and a colonnade within a colonnade. Pamim Shayu Bashishim Ribo Al Shishim Ribo. He says there was twice the number of the people who left Mitzrayim, 1.2 million people in the building. Ubima Shel Eitz, there was a beam of wood, Bemtzios in the middle, The Chazan HaKnesses, Omed Alel, would stand on the bima. Vasudrin Biyod, he had flags. The Kivin Shigil Anis Amen. So the Chazan was in the front and might have said a Kaddish, but the people in the back no way could hear that. So he would wave a flag when it was time to say Amen. Hello, Amen. And even though they didn't hear it, they were told, oh, he said the bracha, you can answer Amen now. For those of us, or anyone on this call, who's been in the Belzer Shul in Yerushalayim. So that's probably the largest shul in the world. And there also, somebody stands on the bima and gives a clap, when the shots has finished, let's say after saying each mizmor of Birchas HaShachar, so they'll give a clap to let people in the back know that he's finished and you can move on and say the next, after Yehi Chavod, you say Ashrei, after Ashrei, you say Hallelujah. Same sort of Maisa goes on. If not with a flag, they give sort of a patch. So it seems from the Gemara that although many of the Mispalalim could not hear the actual bracha of the Chazan, they responded Amen anyways, since they knew based on the scars exactly when the bracha was recited. This is in fact the conclusion of many poskim, including Rav Moshe Feinstein, that it's permitted and maybe even required to respond to a bracha or tefillah heard on the telephone. Be'inyan shmiyas havdalah ayidei telephone leisha hanimtzas bebeis cholim. We know that women don't make their own havdalah, but they listen to their husbands when they make havdalah. And let's say there was a woman who was in the hospital and she wanted to hear havdalah over the telephone. Hinei im iav sharla shetishma havdalah b'mkoma. Let's say nobody's walking around the hospital like the chaplain to make havdalah for people. Vada yesh la lishma telephone. So she should hear it by telephone. She yoter notice, she yotze bezeh, kede katafti b'tshuva borachayim chelik beisim and kufches gabi kriyas Megillah. He wrote a tshuva that you can listen to Megillah also by telephone or by a microphone. Vuadin gabi avdallah. V'chein tzarich lanus amin al bracha sheshomim by telephone, by the microphone, misafek. So we see very clearly Rav Moshe allows, even though your voice is being changed digitally over the phone, he didn't have a problem with that. Although Rav Moshe's allowance of fulfilling up over the phone or other electronic devices was clearly only intended in Shas Atchak, but it seems from the last line that he would agree that anytime one hears a bracha electronically, one may and perhaps must, due to doubt, answer Amen. However, one could respond that such permission based on the Gemara and Sukkah applies only when one is in relatively close physical proximity to the minyan or the one reciting the bracha. But if one is far away and hears the bracha digitally, perhaps the Gemara would not sanction this practice. And this approach is taken by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Gam ra'iti b'mitzvahs David la Rav Feldman, shekasav b'kitzur Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Megillah, v'chein im rishai la'anot amen achar birchas chaver sheshomeh al yedei telephone. Can you answer amen from a bracha that you heard over a telephone? Ayin shus minchas Eliezer, v'od achronim shedibru mizeh, who spoke about it. L'fi advarim shamarnu nireh sheyesh l'shmiya zu din hanafat sudrim. This is like waving the flags in the synagogue in Alexandria. It was just that they should know where the shots was. You shouldn't answer amen on a bracha that you're mechuyev to be yotze in. Could be that you have to be physically in that shul. But if you hear it over a microphone, or or he doesn't hear it directly from the shots, he just follows the tzibur, similar to Alexandria, that might work if you're in physical proximity. If you're very distant, miles away, the telephone, you're hearing it from a membrane. What he's talking about is when you speak on the phone, it's vibrating and it's creating a digital sound. You're not hearing it really from the person. It's been digitalized and you're hearing it amplified again. And he had a whole, Shlomo Zalman was very machmir. He felt you could not, your voice is changed through the digital technology, and therefore you could not be Yotze Megillah. He argued with Rav Moshe regarding this. Now, we will pick up next week in the third approach of Rav Ovadia Yosef, and we'll continue this sugya of how, what can we do regarding Zoom and answering Amen and further. Does anybody have any comments, questions about anything that we learned tonight?
Yeah, I have a question. When you talk about health authorities, sort of setting the rules, now some health authorities are politically appointed, and they may have a different opinion versus what the current medical opinion is because they are following a political line. I'm just verbalizing here. What happens in that case when the political appointee happens to be a doctor, but he's spouting more of a political philosophy versus a medical philosophy?
Well, first of all, the way the United States seems to have worked, remember, in Israel, everything is much more centralized. So there they had the Misrad HaBriyut, the health minister would issue the guidelines. That's what we're talking about, the health authority. There was only one, right? The minister of health in Israel would say, okay, everybody's in quarantine, or everybody's got to stay in the house, or whatever. So there was one law, and that would be considered the health. Now in America,
Here it's localized.
it was done state by state and even city by city,
Even
right?
county, yeah, exactly.
San Francisco closed, we were not closed, then we closed. So there are, for example, the NIH, the FDA, whatever. So they issue opinions, but Lamaisa, it was all local. So we follow what we're talking. I think what we would be talking about is like when the governor said, "Okay, we got to close," we closed. When they open up the the government didn't. The government issued the rules based on what was her name? She was like the county health supervisor, whatever.
Yeah.
The government, he's not a doctor, so he would issue the rulings that our current local authority, that's what we're talking about. When
Okay.
the halachas would speak to that's what it said. It's the authority. It's not, this doctor says you can't do, no, it's governmental. I would believe.
All right. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so next week, probably the same time, 8:00, back to the 9 time. We'll be in touch by email. Tomorrow night,
Yeah.
Daf Yomi.
7:30.
Huh?
We said Wednesday, 7:30.
Wednesday, why
Not
Wednesday?
the Wednesday, Tuesday and Thursday,
Yeah.
not Wednesday.
Tomorrow's regular time. Tomorrow's 8:00.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
All right.
But Thursday, rather than do it after Tzvika Shir, we decided to do it before, so it won't be too.
Yeah.
Okay. Shkoyach, Ernie.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Johnny, pajama. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.